Welcome to episode 27 of Paranormal Unwrapped with Krista Raisa and Jack Roth. Krista is a channel, teacher, and artist. Jack is an investigative journalist, author, and award-winning filmmaker. Geraldine is an intuitive energy healer, meditation instructor, Ascension coach, and experiencer. Welcome, everyone, to this seriously good episode. I'm not saying that lightly. And I know, Jack, you want to say something right now, right? You want to say something?
No, I just want to say hi to you guys. Oh, we're excited. Hello, everyone. And Geraldine, thanks for coming on. We're excited to have you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, guys. It's exciting to be here.
Geraldine needs no introduction for our peoples. I'm sure you all know who she is. But in case you didn't, just really quick, you guys, I talk about the Alba Weinman regression number 133 in the Spiritual Planes and Dimensions online course. You must click that link and watch, because Geraldine it is like a regression you've never seen before. She starts off with going into past lives, into explanations for why things are the way they are on the planet now. And my favorite part was how people were so zombified. Then I met Geraldine at UFO Congress, and she treated me with nothing but kindness and respect and grace. And whenever I talk about her, people go, "Oh my God, I love her." Jack,
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much.
What do you have to say for yourselves?
Well, I have to say for myself. Oh, I'm humbled and honored, and thank you so much. I'm so glad that you checked that out. You know, it's been quite a journey, guys. And I think both of you know, Jack knows too, because he met me early on when all this was just kind of beginning and developing. It's been a whirlwind. The past 3 years, now 4 years of my life have been so incredibly transformative. And it really goes to show that, you know, it's funny, like when you have these deep awakenings, it kind of propels you forward to come into who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be doing, to be of service, if that's, you know, what you choose to be doing. And then everything, it's like the universe supports you. It helps you do what you're supposed to do. And, it's not that everything is rainbows and sunshine and light and love. You know, it's a journey. It's a journey of transformation, of integration, of massive amounts of information. And for me, that regression, for example, that you're talking about was major. It was major, Krista and Jack, because, you know, myself, I was introduced to a lot of this information that I had not known before, you know, in that regression.
Well, your journey is amazing, because and for those who don't know, Geraldine is one of the three main individuals we focus on in Extraordinary the Seeding, which is available on Amazon Prime, among other various digital streaming services around the world. So you can definitely see Geraldine in that. And if you watch that, of course, you'll get a better idea of who she is and what she went through. But and Geraldine, right, I've known you now for a couple of years, and the first time was when we interviewed you. But what I found fascinating is there are experiencers out there who they're experiencers, and they're trying to wrap their heads around what's happening to them, which is enough of a task. It really is, just to try to deal with what's happening. But you've become a teacher. You took that to another level. You've evolved. You've totally evolved. Not that you weren't evolved before, but like you've evolved to another level of spirituality and understanding based on these very trying and difficult experiences that you had. So I think for the sake of the viewers today, if you could talk about the beginning, and I want to say it's 2013 is when you had your first. Okay, let's talk about what happened, and then we'll take it from there.
That's right. So here's how it happened. In 2013, I had a conscious contact experience with extraterrestrials in my home in Union City. And that night, and I would love for you guys to check out the film to learn more about it. But I talk about this where I'm waking up all of a sudden one night to a bright light in my room, and it's 3:33 in the morning, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm paralyzed and removed out of my room into craft, where I'm shown a series of information. Okay, I'm meeting these extraterrestrials, these incredible beings that have these tremendous eyes and very tall beings, slim structures that look like grays. They're gray. It's what we know as gray. And as I'm being introduced to this information, I'm most importantly being introduced to these children that are said to be mine. And as I'm meeting these children, the exchange is incredible. These children recognize me as their mother, and I recognize them as my children because I can see myself in these children. So, right there was the beginning of, questions. Where did they come from? How did they come to be? Who allowed this to happen? Did I make an agreement to have these children? How did I end up in this situation where I am now experiencing such a paradigm shift in my reality, coming from a background of being in a corporate world, having my own company in the event planning field where I am miles away from any of these topics, into now facing this experience, being on this craft with these beings and being introduced to massive amounts of information. So, returning from that, the very next morning, my initial thought was, okay, was that a dream? What did I experience? Because you don't know how to, when the first time you're having these kind of interdimensional contact, you don't know how to translate that into our reality, our physical reality. It's something so outside our understanding that we just don't know how to translate that. And that next Monday, when I was in front of one of my clients for the first time teaching meditation again, I could see her entire multidimensional body and the amount of energy and I was completely empathic and intuitive, connecting to her thoughts, her feelings, and emotions. It was overwhelming. And I had to transition from that point for 3 months. It was difficult for me to leave my house. So, that to me was my proof that what I had experienced was beyond a dream. It was beyond imagination, it was in the physical that had literally shifted my entire energetic field, the way that I experience life. So, that was the beginning of the journey. And 5 years later, in 2017, I was introduced to Alba Wyman's work, and curious, I decided to try to get a session with her, and I did. And it was then I had been working on myself a lot. And it's important to note that, because some people that have these experiences, they go into regression. Sometimes it's still hard to access some of this information. They experience a lot of resistance in coming into the really locked memories that can occur in trauma, in traumatic experiences, right? So, I had been working in meditation in really clearing and deconstructing all of these programs that have come into my, in my mind, in my paradigm, to disconnect me from my core self. And I think that work, in combination with this extraterrestrial contact, really opened up gateways for me to understand things in a very clear, very pure. I was not listening to radio. I was disconnected from social media, no television, movies, nothing. It was a pure connection to my, source, myself. And so that really allowed for the information that came in to be, what it was. A very interesting experience to have that. So that's how it started.
Wow.
And
it was
you're doing
go ahead,
regressions
Krista.
now. Yeah.
Yes.
For others.
And yes, that's right. And I think what has developed is that because of the ability to see the multidimensional body, I began to understand for the first time what it meant to be a multidimensional being. I had been trained in pranic energy healing, quantum energy healing, but mainly as a hobby, in 2009, 2008, early on, because I had a curiosity of how the multidimensional body functioned, before I even knew really what that meant. And when I saw things, now you begin to see how energy is stagnant in the body. Now you begin to see how the chakra energy centers move and interact with the organs and with the multidimensional complex. I mean, we're layers and layers of different vibrational frequency that's interconnected with other dimensions that we're working with, that we're connected with. So my question at that point was that I had gone down the rabbit hole of spirituality. And when I came into the regression and the word Nephilim, the word of these Anunnakis came into my vocabulary, which I had never even read in my life before, I had to go and do research to understand that what I had just talked about wasn't just something I made up. And that was really the most impactful thing for me. After doing research and finding all this information, I realized there's people that dedicate their lives to researching these things, that research the Nephilim and, the ancient texts that talk about these civilizations, these ancient civilizations that were once created, life seated on this planet as a result of extraterrestrial contact, of this very advanced technology and knowledge. So, when you put all this together, it really makes you question, where did our human race come from? And if this is a seeding of life, and certain lineages, bloodlines have been preserved over, historically in our timeline, what are we? What does that make us? So the concept of hybridization, of being hybridized, is really something that we need to start paying attention to, and we need to start questioning. And it's such a very complex thing. It's not just who's running this world, but within us, how are we interconnected? How did we come into the lives that we're living and the experiences that we're having?
Right. Because one of the things that came through for you in the regression was the idea of DNA alterations, like you were just talking about, and and going way back. So, you have the idea of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And I know we talked about it briefly the first time that we interviewed you, but when you have a paradigm shift like this, it's not an easy thing for people who haven't been through it. It could be painful. Like you would mention, you were in a corporate job, you were making good money, you were in a committed relationship with an individual, but now all of a sudden you change, right? So overnight, pretty much all of a sudden your paradigm changes, but everything else around you is kind of staying the same. So how did you navigate that? That changed your life.
It completely changed my life. But really, Jack, one of the things that's really interesting about this and about my journey, and, it can serve as an inspiration perhaps, or maybe guidelines for others that are going through this. What helped me is having a very strong spiritual foundation and a connection to myself. There are certain laws per se of the universe that when we understand them, when we learn them, we become familiarized with them and we become introduced to them by the inner work that we do, meditation, and whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, I've never read books about this kind of a thing. Everything that I talk about and teach and experience is because I have gone in and done hours of meditation to get to know how my emotions function, how they work, how they move around the body, how they affect me and how they affect others. And it was through that journey that I became aware of these laws of the universe, of creation, manifestation, how our DNA stores and works with information. And if it wasn't for that foundation, I think that all of these things that I was coming into, this really deep information, this wisdom about our life seating on this planet, would have been very difficult for me to navigate, because I would be very disconnected from my own self. And what I mean by that is that our DNA stores massive amounts of information. As a matter of fact, it is holographic in a sense that it is storing such massive amounts of information that within a teaspoon of DNA, you can store the information of the entire planet, the historical history of the entire planet. So can you imagine how much we are storing in our body? We are multidimensional in a sense that everything that is what makes up who we are is interconnected with all other beings here. We are really one organism of consciousness. And so that being said, this one organism of consciousness is providing like a router. We are receiving information, storing information, and also we are giving out information to those around us. So this dynamic of working with this system of energy networks in our body, the meridian lines, are also mirroring other aspects of ourselves that are working on other dimensions that are non-physical. And so when you tap into the Akashic records per se, so what we call the Akashic records, this kind of interconnected network of knowledge and information, it is the storage system of information that is a part of the collective, which we all have the ability to access. And the reason why we're not accessing that information is because right now we're too involved in the external self, the external stimulation, the experiential aspect of the human experience, which pulls us away from coming in and accessing that information. So it's really very beautiful and complex science to really understand how the human body works. But navigating this kind of information becomes easy when you understand how your own body processes daily experiences.
And when we're speaking, I'm thinking about it in science terms, because a lot of the Orion Council messages can be interpreted as physics trying to come through. So we have a lot of work to do to even comprehend who we are. When you're talking about mirroring, they actually have these mirror neurons that have a very specific function, so it's very exciting to listen to you speak, because I just looking at your artwork of these multidimensional energies, I think of plasma beings and universal consciousness. I think of etheric energies a lot, and just having the language to explain it. You've just done such a wonderful work. So also, everybody, please check the links below. I've been just pointing because we have the links to the film in the About section, but it's also available on Amazon Prime and on YouTube.
Yeah, it's so funny because one of the things that happened, and Chris, I don't think I ever told you, we interviewed, we were there a long time, Geraldine. I don't know if it was 6, 7, 8 hours. It might have even been longer. And, and John Sumple, one of my partners in J3. So he's asking questions and he's thorough, man. We went through like a list, and my brain was completely fried at the end of that day. I mean, you're so eloquent in the way you explain things, and it's different than a lot of experiencers. And I don't mean to, it's not a diss on other experiencers at all. People are on their own paths, on their own journeys, and they have to figure it out on their own. But the way you kind of took this, and I find you're an extremely logical person from the standpoint of, it's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, this happened to me. Of course it's emotional, and we're talking a couple years certainly now after very difficult experiences that occurred. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's like, I want to figure it out. I'm going to figure out what this all means. But I wanted to ask you though, like when it comes to you, so you were introduced to children on craft and we're told that these were your hybrid children. For people, and I know there are people out there who are listening to this who have had these kinds of experiences where there's hybrid children involved. Mm-hmm. How did you deal with that? Where did you put that in order for you to move forward and say, okay, I have these children, I may or may not see them again. How'd you deal with that?
Right. So it's a really important question. And the thing is that when I saw the children at that point, first of all, the initial emotional connection with them was really strong. It was powerful. It was like when they were removing them from my space, I became emotional because I was saying, well, who's going to take care of them? How come I didn't know about this? Am I responsible for them? Who's, how is this dynamic? Because as a mother, I'm not a mother on this planet, but maternally, we have a maternal instinct that kicks in when we see a child that is in front of us, made of us. And there's a responsibility and so many things that play as a role, as a part of that. So when you come back to Earth after connecting with this being, there was a confusion. There was a longing. There was a wanting to connect. There was a wanting to figure out how to reach them again. And then a feeling of helplessness, thinking, God, I don't have any way to connect with them. And then we even have to be able to compartmentalize that into our own reality. How do you get back to work after you just met children that supposedly were your own? So it was really hard from that emotional perspective. And I think but for me, the thing was this. My thing was, I need to be able to understand truth. I cannot get caught up in the emotional sentiment of it until I understand fully what is happening here, because we live again in a reality which we are constantly navigating mind control. We are constantly navigating, a lot of different things that are affecting the way that we can think clearly and see things in reality. Right now, a lot of us, our vision of what's actually happening in the world around us is covered by a veil of illusion, in which we think that reality is one way, but in reality, things that are actually happening are on a much more complex level. And so that has always been a part of me that always wanted to understand the truth. So when I went into the regression, my question was, please, universe, higher self, help me understand, what are these children here for? What is the role that I play as this human vessel in order to create these children? And of course, as you know, after the regressions, I found out that I had 24 hybrid children in 4 different hybridization programs. So now it becomes more complex. I being utilized, in other words, for the procreation of these kinds of children, which are a combination of genetics. We're talking about a genetic cocktail. So it's not a human, it is a mix of gray, it is a mix of a reptilian, a mix of many different species that are being utilized. Why? The question is why. There is something within this human body, within our make, that makes it extremely valuable to combine with other species. Whether it's the other species that's valuable or the value is in the fact of our design, in the architecture of the human design. The human is this holographic, multidimensional structure. It's a bioorganism that is interconnected with many different dimensions. And what makes it so valuable is that when we have a certain connection to the soul, of course, our human body is like this. We have a soul that connects to the human body, and the human body is consisting of the DNA, which is connected to your ancestral lineage. So in regression, we are visiting past lives. Through our DNA, we know who we're connected to on this planet Earth. So there are more than one ways to understand how we're interconnected here. It happens on a physical level and it happens on an etheric level. And those connections define our consciousness and this experience that we're having as a human soul in this body. So that being said, when a child is born, it is taking apart a fractal of that infinite consciousness that is what the soul is made out of. The soul is that infinite consciousness, and creating another being from that infinite consciousness. And that DNA is the holographic structure that is connected to a non-physical structure that connects to much larger information. So that's really what we're talking about. Hybrids are a product of not physical and non-physical information, right? And so the reason for the combination of these kinds of genetics is something that we need to begin to understand. We can look to Mary Rodwell's research on the hybrids and the hybrids that are being born on this planet. These are incredibly advanced children that have access to information on physics, science, structures of reality that transcend the education of a Stanford student that's been in physics for years, that is stuck on certain paradigm because he's only looking at it from our physical, from our perspective, from the limited science that we know. But these children have transcended that because they have began to understand other paradigms of reality. So
right. And you're talking about indigo kids who are actually on the planet. Like we refer to them as different things, right?
Exactly.
That's where, okay.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. That's exactly right. And so these, in other words, are these hybrid children that we're creating off planet are also a mixture of this information that is being seeded back into the reincarnation cycle. However, not all of these children are being put back into the reincarnation cycle. Okay. Some of these children are being kept on craft or in, other planets, perhaps, for other kinds of agendas. And the agendas can range from a very high vibration agenda to a very low frequency agenda, meaning that, this is where these laws of the universe come into play. What happens when you take this organism that is made of the fabric of infinite consciousness, and what happens when you begin to manipulate, control, suppress, genetically modify, or even destruct, this structure of organism? Many things happen as a result of that. And if we look at the original bloodlines that seeded on this planet, in my regression, I saw that there were 3 main bloodlines that seeded life on this planet. Those bloodlines have been preserved heavily through our historical bloodline into these very specific families that have gone through history, from like Mesopotamia, Egypt, going into Rome, Italy, into the UK, into these bloodlines of control that have always been in places of control, where they have defined how our structures of society were going to be built, financial society, everything. They have decided that up until we look at the presidential lineage. If you just look at the presidents that have in the U.S., a lot of them are actually related, okay, by blood. So there is something here. And then if you look at the powers that are in control in the financial system, it's a small number of these bloodlines, of these families that are in control of all the systems that are running our society. So we have certain bloodlines. 147 companies are owned by these specific families. And those 147 companies are like they're like an umbrella that own all of the other companies that are everything from the toothpaste to the banks. Everything is interconnected. So the question is, if you have this small group of people running our society, our government, the choices that they're going to be making in those businesses, because everything is a business, our health is a business, education is a business, everything is a business, then, those choices are going to be pro the benefit. So it's a lot of responsibility to put on these small group of people that are running our society. Okay. And so that really makes us question, if these small groups of people are running our societies, then they're not necessarily all pro-life. And we need to take a look at how our society is structured around us. The people around us, are they okay? Are they struggling? Are they financially struggling? How is their health doing? The majority of us are, in a constant state of survival mode. We can't pay our bills. We can't, we can't move past these blockages that we have, not only just emotionally, that's just the minimal thing. We're looking at our entire structure to get education, to be fed properly. All of these systems that are interconnected are affecting us on such a deep way. And we can just look at the world right now and what's happening in our society right now. In one day, our entire reality was changed. We went from a state of being involved in our lives to complete global shift of coming into panic mode, into a fear-based thinking, survival mode. How powerful are these systems that it's so easy to manipulate and change our emotional state from one day to another. So we need to, I think that what's happening in the world around us right now is a good wake-up call to help us remember, where the power is right now and where it should be. Okay, the power should be within each one of us. And so to bring it back to this talk about the hybrid children, in the same way that we are being perhaps manipulated, controlled, or utilized in this organic human structure on the planet, these souls that are being created for many different agendas. And the purpose of that is the soul is what's important, is the currency, is our DNA, because the DNA stores this emotion. Every experience that we have, it's storing in the body. When we come into a state of panic, of fear, all of that is stimulating aspects of the human body that are stimulating fear in the root chakra, sacral, solar. These are the sections of the body that are run by the physical plane. So when they are manipulated, the human body comes into the state of survival mode. Okay. And that produces a massive amount of vibrational frequency of a signature for me as a human organism that is interconnected to many others, to you and me, right? So when this information is moved, when it's stimulated, it creates waves of movement in a society that's interconnected. So the soul that is connected to the DNA lineage, that is connected to the endocrine system, that is connected to this human organism, is recording all of those experiences. And this takes us to talk about the reincarnation cycle. Why did the soul decide to come into this human body to experience all of these things right now, right? That's the question. If you take this on a much higher level, all of these hybrids that are being created, we are hybrids. In other words, we are the hybrids that were seeded ancient, millennia ago here on this planet, that have now evolved into what we are today. The shell perhaps has evolved, but also our consciousness is evolving at the same time, because the natural structure of this entire multiverse is evolution. Okay? It is evolution.
So, okay. So, Krista, go ahead, because I know you. I have
I have a lot.
This is like you need to teach a PhD class on freaking reality. Just call it reality. I mean, this is like, it blows your mind. This is what I'm talking about when I talk to you, and I feel like I have a ton of homework to do. Like, it's like, no, it's awesome. Krista, go ahead. It's.
Question, teacher. How, Miss Teacher, how does consciousness evolve? Could you give us an example?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question, because if we understand what consciousness is, so it basically, the fabric of all things is this infinite consciousness. What we think of as source, people can call it God or the creator, the origin of all things. We are all made of this infinite consciousness, and infinite consciousness is beautifully developed, and we live in a structure of reality that is based on this fractal. Okay, so just as consciousness, the purpose of it is to become aware of itself through any experience, any and all experience, good, bad. Everything that is made up of this particle of infinite consciousness is trickling down from dimensions to physical structures to the human body down to the cellular level, is made up with the same purpose of becoming aware of itself. Okay, so your DNA, every molecule, every cell, every atom in your body is moving in the same way. It is vibrating, oscillating to create these networks that are interconnected and intercommunicating with everything around it. And so the purpose of that experience, even as an atom, is for it to become aware of itself. And we see that macro and micro. In the human experience, we have all of these challenging experiences that come up in our lifetime based on the information that is stored within our DNA. based on all of the previous ancestors that have experienced trauma, pain, and suffering. We are cycling through those patterns of behaviors, patterns of programs that make up our experience here today. Okay, so everything that we have experienced from the moment we get up to the moment we go to sleep, we are cycling through patterns of programs. And those programs come from inside, but they're also working with the programs that are on the outside, right? The programs that are on the outside are the belief system that we are here to be born, to grow up, to get an education, to get married, to have this job, and then die. That's our program. And in those few little 100 years, we have the option of becoming aware of ourselves, or we can just go back into the same matrix and just live in the feeling body, right? We just experience things in and out, on and out, on and out. So in that same way, the same way the human functions like that, it's happening on a much larger scale. Think really, really big. Think the planet as an organism that is also, as a collective, the humankind becoming aware of itself. Think from the planets, the other planets, levels of consciousness. Each planet has a different vibrational frequency, becoming aware of itself, moving through dark matter, black holes, white holes of duality. Everything is built on the structure of this dualistic concept of creation and destruction. And we are navigating those two energies inside out all the time up until you get to the largest scale of infinite consciousness, which, let's say, this entire organism of life that we live in, let's say the extraterrestrials that came in and seeded life on this planet, were consciousness that rejected itself. Okay, think about that. Consciousness that rejects itself. When we reject our own consciousness, when I say I'm unworthy and not good enough, I begin to have a parasitic consciousness because I need to now have other people around me tell me that I'm worthy. Okay, so think about that in your emotional state. Now let's take it on a bigger scale. When an entire human race believes that they are needing to be in survival mode, dependent on the financial systems, dependent on credit, on the money to survive, to buy food, to do all these things as a collective, to be healthy, we need medications. There's no health within us. When we have that kind of belief systems, we become parasitic as a whole because we need to survive. We need to have things outside of us provide health and maintain our livelihood. And that is a false concept, right? But let's take bigger. So then this infinite consciousness that has evolved to bring life on this planet said we need to have other beings produce a life force energy for us to keep surviving. And so in order to do that, we need to maintain these beings believing that they are in a slave mode or in survival mode. And we're going to let them cycle through these little cycles called life. They're going to die, they're going to come back, die and come back. They're going to forget every time they reincarnate what they're here to do. And as they do, they're going to keep trying desperately to wake up. Because why? Because you are a soul, and your soul is made of infinite consciousness. And infinite consciousness, as a natural law, is meant to evolve. They can only sustain that infinite consciousness from becoming aware and becoming conscious a certain amount of time. In this lifetime, we have a choice of becoming aware. And that's
okay.
The design.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to, it's actually the whole idea of duality, because I think there are a lot of people listening, and this is what the way I think. And it's okay. So when we talk about the bloodlines and we talk about the experiences that you went through, right, to get to this point, but also the actual abduction experience, if you will. So are we talking about benevolent, malevolent? Who's the good guys? Who's the bad guys? What are we talking about here? Yeah. Is there a good and a bad? Well, duality, you talked about duality, so there's both. But when you say you are for hybridization, 4 different hybridization programs, are they the same agendas, different agendas? Who's more benevolent? Who's more malevolent? I mean, does it matter?
That's an amazing question.
The see-through ones are better.
The see-through one. Yeah, so I mean that's a really important and amazing question, because it goes back to this, what I'm telling you, this, you know, the origin of life being seated on this planet. When it came in, it's consciousness that rejected itself, so it had to become parasitic, and so it became parasitic by seeding this race. But the seeding of life, it doesn't stop there. It has to continue for the race. So now it's taking it up by utilizing the humans that it uses to continue this agenda on the human planet. It's also utilizing to create hybrids on other dimensional planes. The continuous creation of fractals of this soul, which is fragmented. When the soul comes into the human body and has a traumatic experience, the soul is fragmented. And so what we end up looking like is like a spider web. We are at the center of the web, and we are energetically connected and tied to multiple dimensions of reality. Okay. And so that being said, why is that fragmentation occurring? If the fragmentation occurs when something negative happens, when something traumatic happens to the human body, and we are continuously put in situations in which fragmentation is occurring on a daily basis, momentarily, it really allows us to understand the design of this human body. The design of the human body in a 3D plane, in the physical plane, is meant to experience the human body. But we are also operating on more than one physical, on more than one plane, one of a dimension, not just physical, also non-physical. Okay, and so these extraterrestrials that are operating, or not even extraterrestrials, they're just other consciousness. It's just another consciousness. It's all that they are operating and carrying out these certain agendas to prolong the lifespan of the soul being in this parasitic cyclical consciousness. Okay. And so the question is, well, is that good? Is that bad? At the end of the day, what are we talking about here? And as I mentioned before, this model of becoming aware of yourself is happening micro and macro. So just like we are evolving as humans, these species are also evolving. They're going through their own evolutionary cycle where they have the choice of becoming aware. It's my opinion that when we come into this physical body, we have a choice that in this lifetime, we can either become aware of ourselves, become conscious of ourselves on multiple planes, waking time, dream time, and death, so that we can navigate the soul out of this reincarnation cycle and then experience other things outside of this. Okay. So it's not a matter of good and bad. We are here in a physical plane experiencing duality as infinite consciousness becoming aware of itself through all possibilities. And those possibilities in the three-dimensional plane are going to be based on emotions, physical interactions, this kind of exchange. So that's really what we're talking about. It's not so much as defining it as good and bad. Now, these agendas can be carried out on a high vibrational plane as well. But again, what I tend to believe is beings that are on a high vibration, usually by the law of the universe of free will, which means that you cannot interfere with any being that is choosing to have that experience. When you interfere, that's a parasitic consciousness, and that's infringing on the law of free will. So anytime that someone puts a thought into your mind, utilizes mind control, utilizes anything, that's a parasitic consciousness. Anytime, so if we think that the higher vibrational frequency will really interfere with us in any way, that's something that I am, questioning, because in any case, it will interfere with the human organism. So I think that when beings are sovereign, when they are this embodiment of a high consciousness, they will in themselves not interfere with anything else. So that's how we can look at these two ways of interacting with consciousness.
So well said. This is so good.
Krista, does this jive at all with the Orion, some of the channeling that you've received?
Oh,
Is there
Geraldine
familiar?
reads my thoughts. Like when you're talking with Geraldine, she's having multiple conversations with you, if that makes any sense. So I like I'm just thinking, I'm seeing sovereignty, and she started talking about sovereignty. So thank you for being telepathic.
Oh,
Thank you for
I think we're just pulling from that, the records. We're pulling from the Akash. We just understand how, things work. So
Yeah, I'm definitely outgunned again. But here's the thing. So no, this is good because this is how, and this always works out well, right, Krista? Because I'll come from the 3D standpoint of people who are listening who are like, well, wait a minute, right? Like, the whole idea, the question I just asked, and you answered it again. That was a beautiful answer because it's like not necessarily. So in other words, you don't necessarily resent anything that's happened to you. You don't resent the abductions.
Absolutely.
And that's
not. Yeah. Go ahead.
okay. All right. No, because a lot of people are angry by it. I mean, it's a human emotions that people go through, but the fact that you've gotten through to the other side, it's almost like Jesus in a way. I don't mean to compare you to Jesus, but I'm saying you're like, forgive them because there really is no, I get it. Now that I understand it, I get it. But I do have a question, and it's a 3D question because I'm dying to know this. Okay. So you have the 3 bloodlines. Is one of, and I think we may have discussed this before, but is one of them the Merovingian kings and Jesus? And is that one of the bloodlines? Do you know what the bloodlines might be?
Absolutely. So the bloodlines that I'm talking about are like this. This is how it was presented to me. And this is what I'm writing about in my book. It's controversial on some level because of the definitions of these bloodlines. One of the bloodlines is a reptilian bloodline or draconian bloodline. Okay. And another one is a humanoid, which is a Pleiadian. So one was shown to me as green bloodline, one was shown to me as blue bloodline, and another one is a red bloodline. Now, those colors are very interesting because colors are vibrational frequency. They're how we translate energy frequency into a language, in other words. But more than that, each one of these bloodlines, the red one is said to be of the earth. It's part of the structure and creates the architecture of the matrix or the society that we live in. They set up everything based on certain planets. So when they go to the planet, they're in charge of studying the minerals, the natural aspects, the physics, the chemistry of this entire environment. And from that, they structure a matrix or a reality of how we're going to be living. Okay. The next one is the reptilian draconian. Okay. And these lineages are meant to, these are like the geneticists of these lineages that focus on the combination of genetics, both on planet and off planet, because this is programs that are interconnected with more than just our planet. All planets are being utilized in a similar fashion or in these kinds of idea. Then the blue line, which is the humanoid, which is, more of a humanoid lineage, are said to be perhaps these more advanced that come in and fill in the other missing pieces of this terrestrial experience. So we have the environment, we have the genetic make, and then these fill in the other structure. Yes, Chris, did you have something?
No.
Oh, I thought you were saying. Okay. Okay. So these main lineages then seeded that life, right? So they started to create humans. And so these lineages were preserved through history. So if we take a look at, for example, the Merovingian bloodline, it was a lineage that its origin came all the way back from Mesopotamia, right, through the kings. And it was a lineage that was preserved. That means that they practiced incest in that lineage. They did not allow external bloodlines to come into that lineage. They were preserving it. And so if you look at the trace, this is a huge study that goes all the way back to all of the main kings in Egypt that went to Rome. and then went on to Europe. All of those main families, including the Merovingian lines, including all of these, there's many of them, they have practiced these same practices of preserving of those bloodlines for centuries. And the product of those preserved bloodlines, because we're not talking about bloodlines, we're talking about information. They were mixed genetically with off-planet species, okay, to create these lineages, which carried out the agendas that work in those specific lineages. So, for example, the red bloodline that focuses on creating this matrix, from that bloodline came down the descendants that were going to, okay, we're going to get political here. We're going to talk about Hitler.
Right.
The royal, the dynasties, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then you come into the presidential house here in the US. So these families are the ones that are the descendants from these pure lines. Why? Because when in your DNA is mixed with certain bloodlines, it allows you the ability to have access to that consciousness. It allows you on a physical level and a multidimensional level to have access to the information. You have created a thread that connects you to that information that is off planet. So you have an ability of manipulating and communicating with more than one race. And this is
because
going.
it's DNA memory.
It's DNA
right?
memory, it's DNA information that you're pulling from pools of information. So, and so all of these lineages, we are descendants of them. That's something that we have to understand, because just 2,000 years ago, you and I have a relative in common. Me and Krista, me and Jack, we have a relative in common. Can you imagine that? So there is a point of origin of all of us on this planet, and that is the definition of hybridization. You are creating mixtures of genetics in order to create a much larger race. And the races have developed themselves into different, colors, different races, different language, all of these structures that are meant to compartmentalize the reality that we live in. There's nothing really different about each and every one of us other than the mixtures of genetics that are within running through our veins, in other words. And they define how we see the world. They define our perceptions. They define our emotions. So that's the matrix running through our veins that we have to train ourselves on deprogramming from. And that's the work that I did when I first started to come into this. My question was, okay, who am I as a woman? What am I supposed to be as a woman? Who told me that I had to be that way as a woman? Who said I have to be playing out these roles in my life? And I don't even agree with them. So you deconstruct all of those belief systems, and you're going to find yourself with this organism, this multidimensional body that it consists of this soul that is connected to much larger aspects of yourself that transcend the physical limitations.
Okay. All right. So in we're all somehow connected to one of the three bloodlines, but there's an elite aspect to it though, right? There's an elite group that control things.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
That's correct. So all of these bloodlines that have gone through history, creating the historical timeline that we have trickled down to these families now that are running. So we're talking about, like, the Rothschild, Bilderberg. These are the families that from these bloodlines are owning the entire world. 137 companies run this planet. So when you put that much power in a small group, their decisions, every decision that they make affects us down to the food that we eat, to the water that we're drinking. So we need to begin to question that and decide whether that's something that is pro-life, or is it creating problems like we're experiencing here today.
Exactly.
Something fascinating that just sat with me that came through your regression. I'm not going to give the detail. I think people should really watch the whole thing. But you had said under hypnosis that there are people who are like zombies, and it kind of helped me feel less guilty about saving the world, because there are battlefields in this planet where people are doing atrocities. But you said something like it was almost like soulless, kind of, because this concept has come through, which I couldn't understand before, what I was channeling about. But it's almost as if the consciousness has been removed, so that they are kind of drone-like. And so when we focus on some drama news about stuff that happens in other pockets of the world, it almost seems impossible, but it's still happening in like a sort of mindless servitude towards objects and geometries that it's really ultimately serve no purpose, but to, other than to be under someone else's control. And
exactly. And
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And the amazing thing about what you're saying is that it's not that the consciousness is removed, but what's happening now is we're dealing with a couple of different things. It is the suppression of consciousness. The natural aspect of this soul is to evolve. Just the way the universe is moving, scientifically proven, the universe is moving in a spiral form, ascending. And that's the movement of this organism. I call it the matrix multiverse. It's an organism, just like the cell in your body. Imagine that we are living inside of a cell, okay, that is a part of another larger organism. So what's happening is the suppression of consciousness, and it happens through food that lacks in nutrition, which is genetically modified, which is broken down to the point where it just looks really pretty. But even the nutritional aspect of that food, of that one tomato or that one vegetable, is completely not as it was 100 years ago. Okay. And then we're talking about the education. We are being indoctrinated with the same historical timeline that has already come into question so many times, through many means. We're questioning everything from Thanksgiving Day, Columbus story, to the Jesus story, to the story of Jesus. What roots are religions, what roots are societal understanding of the races and the cultures that we live in. A lot of that has been controlled for a reason, because if you maintain and control a certain belief system, it's much easier to control people, because you have them all running on one program, right? And then we look at the aspect of the human body. If you feed it all of these toxic things in the human body, then the human body becomes sick. But it's in addition, it has to be in combination with the emotional state of this organism. If you continue to keep the human organism in a state of survival, fear, anxiety, anger all the time, confusion, it's going to cause this illness in the body. Okay, so we end up being these humans that are helpless, and we are disconnected. Plus, you're going to get this technology, and we're sitting here looking at these mirrors, these black mirrors all the time, reflecting back nothing. We are just completely disconnected from ourselves and everything around us that is real. So this is how we come into this zombie state. We become zombies when we disconnect from our ability to become aware of ourselves, when we disconnect from that sovereignty, that soul that is here to evolve. And we don't even know that we're allowed to ask questions. Look at what we're dealing with today, right now, with this problem that we have in the world around us right now. We don't know what questions to ask. We don't know who to go to get the real answers, because the television and the media is telling us that we need to be really afraid, really afraid, really afraid. And it causes such a tremendous amount of disconnect from ourselves. So that's a problem. That's a problem. And I think that what we're going through is a good opportunity for us to take a step back and question who's in control here. Who are we allowing to be in control? Is it the outside events that are happening, or do we even control what's happening within us, right? So that's what these kinds of lineages, these bloodlines that are in control, have a lot of power, over what's happening in our society here today. And it's time to change that.
Amazing.
Totally agree.
Jack, I am so mind blown, and I have so many questions. I think we're going to have to do another
Yeah, I know we are. I kind of knew that was going to happen, but yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But that's incredible. I think a good way to end this would be then, if we're going to wind down, is what do we do about it? So what do we do? What can we do?
Perfect question. Number one, we need to educate ourselves. First of all, what are we as humans? We're not this physical body. We're not the experience. We need to take a step back and please take 5 minutes of your day, take 30 minutes to sit down and close your eyes and meditate. Because the first step is the step to train the monkey mind. That's the first step of meditation, but that's just the beginning of your journey. We should be able to already dominate that monkey mind. That's a basic thing, okay? The next step is to go deeper, to go and question the emotions. Feel your emotions, get to know your emotions. When you're aware of the emotions, you understand how they move in the body, how they affect you, how you become a slave of your belief systems, your emotions, the programs that you're running through in your lifetime due to your mother, your mother's mother, your father's father, all of your ancestors. You are a product of their trauma. And we have to remember that. So our work to heal ourselves and our family and the problems that we have in our family, the relationships that we have in our life, is to begin working on those programs and finding what's true. This brings me to the third one. What is true? We need to understand how to discern properly. We need to understand the difference between what is false and what is real. How do we know that? All we have to do is look at nature. Nature is perfect balance. It is perfect design. When you have this positive energy and this negative energy working together, when you are integrating and you are aware of both aspects, we can then create. We have a divine feminine, a divine masculine. When you merge them, they create a child, they create life. That is the design of all creation. Creation of thought, creation of things, creation of manifesting things in your life. That's the law. So we have to understand that. What does that mean? When our body is out of balance, when the feminine perspective is out of balance, we're coming from the wounded feminine, wounded masculine. That makes up our perception of everything. We have to rebalance all of those perceptions in order to come into our balanced self, our balanced organism. And it happens on an emotional level, physical level, on community as a whole. We have to rebalance our perceptions about everything, okay? And that's how we begin to rebalance our society, rebalance from the inside out. As above, so below. If this entire world came into a unity consciousness, I can guarantee you that what's happening in our world today would reverse itself in 1 minute, because even illness in the body comes in as a vibrational match to what's inside your body. Illness does not exist without a vibrational match for it to hold on and eat off of. It is a parasite. We have to understand those basic laws of how things function. Parasitic consciousness can come in and take over the human body. So we have to be 100% aware of what is coming into our body, into our mind, through the internet, through what we're hearing, because all of that is meant to hijack and to take over our ability to think for ourselves. So those are the main things. It's coming into this understanding of self-love, of integration. When a fractal of white light comes into a prism, it comes out like a rainbow, like a spectrum on the other end. We are, in our body, that fractal infinite consciousness in a rainbow. The chakras are infinite consciousness organized within the body. So our job is to come from this fragmentation into that white light again, into source. And we do that by working and deprogramming ourselves from the illusion of fragmentation. So those are kind of the things that I would say. We are really powerful. We are the most beautiful, advanced biotechnology. And it's our creation that creates what's happening around us. So we have to take control of that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Everyone, you've heard it.
That's great.
Geraldine, from Bay Area Meditation. Check out the movie, check out her work, check out her website, check out her Instagram, check out the latest meditation. And thank you so much for teaching us today. We really appreciate you and your work.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you so much, Geraldine.
Thank you for having me here. Love you guys so much. Thank you.
Love
Bye-bye.
you too.